They got IT contracts even though they admit they do no IT work. $250 million. WTF.
We're expecting and supporting all relevant authorities to follow up on these irregular contracting and this perhaps breaking of the rules.
A company that had never before received contracts from the federal government started getting an avalanche of contracts just 3 weeks after this prime minister took office.
It's obviously an unacceptable situation, which is why the relevant authorities are fully investigating exactly what went on here.
Reaction on Parliament Hill today after a shocking report from newspaper Presse on the company behind the ArriveCAN app. GC Strategies was tapped to build the government's COVID border crossings app with initial costs pegged at $80,000. But a report from the Auditor General this week found that cost had ballooned to $60 million. The GC Strategies contract hitting more than $19 million of those dollars itself. But that's just a drop in the bucket for contracts awarded to the small four-person company. New analysis done by Joël-Denis, Bellavance, the bureau chief here in Ottawa for Presse, found GC Strategies has received $258 million in contracts since 2015. So what is GC Strategies? It's a four-person IT staffing company based here in Ottawa that's amassed 140 contracts from federal departments and agencies since 2015. Here to break down how those contracts came to light and why it and the ArriveCAN debacle matters to you are two journalists who have been leading on those files. Joël-Denis, JD Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief, as I mentioned, for Presse, and Bill Curry, the Globe and Mail's Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time. And it is true, you have both been very much driving this story. JD, I'll start with you on the news today. The government has announced that they're suspending any further contracts. What's going on behind the scenes that this is driving some suspicion?
Well, the government is looking at all the contracts, as you mentioned. They suspended the contract with GC Strategies since November, and they're looking at all the contracts. That was confirmed to me last night by Public Works or the procurement department, that they're looking at all the contracts that were awarded by that department for other departments like the Border Service Agency, even in those contracts going back to 2015. So there's a lot of work to be done by officials at that department to look at those contracts, whether taxpayers actually got money for value for those contracts.
So let's take a step back for a second. GC Strategies, now like among the popular vernacular in Ottawa here, how did they factor into ArriveCAN in the first place? And what are the questions being raised about how they got that one contract? Forget about all their other ones now.
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody had really heard of this company until ArriveCAN blew up. They are just, when they were at committee, they explained they're really just two guys, and they have no office at all. They work from home. And from our reporting, and you know, we've obtained emails and recorded conversations in terms of how they pitch themselves to clients. Essentially, they just kind of worked up a lot of contacts in that world of the chief information officers, the technology world inside government, and worked those contacts, really promoted themselves as having contacts, and landed big contracts. But the twist is neither of them do any IT work themselves at all.
Right, which I think is an important twist,
yeah,
right?
So they've carved out a niche of winning contracts and then finding subcontractors, all these other people to do the work, and then they take between 15 and 30%. So on a contract, you know, 19 million, that's millions of dollars for these two gentlemen. You know, that's just ArriveCAN. So, and they're getting a lot of work elsewhere.
And I sort of feel like this is getting to the bigger question of why this really matters, JD, which is, so already the public service in the last 8 years has grown significantly. Yeah. I think it's something close to, the PBO told us yesterday, 40%. Yeah. Also, the size of outside contracting has grown at the same time. Now, if you're getting value for that money, that's one thing. If it's somebody who is then handing a contract to somebody else, I feel like the average person is sitting at home going like, that's what our tax money is going to?
Yeah, and I think that's a question that will come back again, because the government will be presenting a budget in this spring, and we may expect some bad news in that budget. A lot of people are looking for increased budgets for healthcare, for example. The NDP wants something for pharmacare. Well, that money will not be there because, you know, the coffers in Ottawa are getting empty as a result of a lot of spending in the past, like on the daycare program. So when you're looking at, as Bill mentioned, that some people are acting as middlemen between the government and companies that actually do the work, how is that value for money? And the taxpayers will be asking themselves, why is this necessary when you've got an increase in public servants working for the federal government, and also that the government should be trying to be as lean as possible in spending the money, and that's not the case right now. Now, my sense is that the famous question that the Auditor General always asks when she tables a report is the following: did taxpayers get money for value or value for money? And I think when you look at this whole affair, the clear answer is no.
So the other question I have as I read through all your reporting over the last number of months is something weird going on behind the scenes, something unethical? I know that there are some investigations going on involving a lot of other stuff as to criminality, and the possibility exists for the RCMP to expand that investigation. They actually just responded to CTV in response to what the Conservatives are asking for, saying that that possibility does exist. Based on your investigation, in your reporting so far, what do you think it is? Are there people in the CBSA who are greasing the wheels of GC strategies, or does that possibility exist?
I think that was one of the frustrations that people had when reading the Auditor General's report, is she didn't answer that question.
Yes.
Is this mismanagement, incompetence, or is it something more serious? And I don't think we know that yet. We do know, like you mentioned, the police are investigating some of the people who worked on ArriveCAN. There are 2 people who have been suspended with pay, who are very senior public servants who worked on ArriveCAN and were involved in another contract. That's the topic of an RCMP investigation. So, there are some things going around that look pretty serious. The Auditor General talked about conflict of interest violations. We know that, Christian Firth, the GC Strategies managing partner, had organized an ArriveCAN first-year anniversary whiskey tasting for the public servants who were working on ArriveCAN. So, that raises some issues. And the Auditor General says these kinds of things, along with other dinners and things, if you're going to accept that from a vendor, you should disclose that. And she found no evidence that they did.
So I just have one quick follow-up for each of you. I'll start with you, Bill. I think that the next question is whether or not there's any political involvement. Were there red flags raised that politicians ignored, or is this also just best case, worst case mismanagement thing? Because it's become very political, obviously, as we heard off the top in the House of Commons.
Yeah, so far there's no evidence of a politician or a political staffer being involved in this, but nonetheless, ministers are responsible for their departments. And I think what these last few reports from the Procurement Ombudsman and the Auditor General reveal is massive flaws in basic information of how much we are spending on what. They're disclosing numbers and then saying, well, you can't trust those numbers, use these numbers instead because these are flawed. And even the Auditor General spends months going at it and couldn't actually pin down a hard number on what we spent on ArriveCAN. So those are pretty big issues.
Do you think the primary political implication right now, JD, based on what you've seen so far, is that it sparked so many questions about, do they even know what's going on under their own roof?
Yes, I agree with Bill that I don't see any evidence so far that there's a political connection to this issue right now. I think it's more mismanagement within the departments, and the way that was seen also during the COVID-19 pandemic, that there was urgency, and no matter what the money or no matter what the cost, that was done. And that, I think, is a big excuse for now. Maybe when you look back, laxing rules, paper trails missing. And so I think right now, the report that was tabled on Monday by the Auditor General is a must-read for all Canadians to see what was going on in that file.
She didn't buy the pandemic as an excuse. Let's put it that way. I'll leave our conversation there. I really appreciate both of you making the time. Bill Curry and Joël-Denis Bellavance.